It's coming, it's going to hit us hard. And it's going to be 200-mile-an-hour winds. And there's going to be massive tidal waves and earthquakes.
They claim, according to special operations, 4-star generals, that literally it causes a person to go to pieces.
I'll throw 2017 out, and you can take that to the bank.
What should give us hope that this is a turning point? That this is the moment we finally determined we would save our planet.
You're doomed. So to hell with it. Enjoy the ride. I tell people who are interested in listening.
Wait, whoa! What the f***?
Wise men said, just walk this way to the dawn of the light. The wind will blow into your face as the years pass you by.
We all call it Planet X, or NIBIRU, but it is a dwarf star. It's either a red dwarf or a brown dwarf star. Now, the object, which is clearly Planet X by deductive logic and process of elimination, is therefore now between Mars and Jupiter. It's not in the outer reaches of the solar system. It can clearly be seen, especially from the southern hemisphere.
The implications and the side effects of what might happen to us here on Earth is pretty scary. We're going to get into some of that. Now, one of the cool things that David discusses with us here is instead of having to just take his word for it, he gives you coordinates on where you can actually see it for yourself. Mid-2017, he says we're going to see an eclipse with NIBIRU. He has been able to take his background and transition it into research on Planet X, and has recently compiled an awesome book with a treasure trove of information. David, how the heck are you?
Very good tonight, sir. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I appreciate you coming on here with us. I know that you had reached out to us a few weeks ago. You've got a really cool book coming up here that's going to break everything down with NIBIRU. You know, let's talk about what you do.
Well, the way I got into it, I've always believed in following the money. About 5 years ago, I got into some research on the Pentagon black budget. And I don't know if you recall, but you probably do, that the day before 9/11, Don Rumsfeld announced at a Pentagon news conference that the agency was 2.2 trillion short. Money was simply missing, 2.2, not billion, but trillion. So having worked for a period of time at the Pentagon, I realized this was most likely black budget funds. And I did some investigation, and I ran across a couple of areas, basically the deep underground military base research done by Jesse Ventura, done by Phil Schneider, done by other personalities. And I realized, of course, that's likely the source of the lost money. It's black budget ops, and it's being spent. And why is it being spent in terms of these type of bases? So that's how my curiosity was picked, you might say. These bases, I understand, are built away primarily from geologic tectonic areas, but again, when Planet X passes, you're going to have new geotectonic faults established when you have force 11, 12, 13, 14 earthquakes. So I don't know how safe they're going to be. It could be a lost investment for those people. In any case, that was my basic introduction about 5 years ago, and then I got into the science of the topic. My understanding, and this is partly from Phil Schneider, I know he worked 11 years at Groom Lake, Area 51. He says the black budget varies between 0.2 trillion and 1.2 trillion per year. I'm not sure when the inception started. It was absolutely going on in the late 70s and 80s. He says a couple of dozen of these may be reasonable for protection. I agree, nuclear protection. But the question is, why do we have over 130 of these? That doesn't really make any sense unless, obviously, Planet X is absolutely a fact, which it is.
Well, so, 4 years ago, I remember reading an article on Yahoo News that claimed eventually people are going to be able to look up in the sky and they're going to see what looks like a second sun, but really it's a giant sun that exploded. I think they said it was Betelgeuse or something like that. So in my mind, when I read stuff like that in the news, I think it's, the forces behind the scenes or whoever's kind of orchestrating the media prepping people, subconsciously getting them ready for this type of event. First, it's just an explosion that looks like a sun, and then, hey, oh, it is a sun. So, I mean, do you have any physical evidence, like pictures that you can say without a shadow of a doubt, or files or white papers?
Yes, I do. In fact, there's some very good videos on the internet itself that are good photographic analysis. There's one called Multiple Suns Rise Over Halifax, Nova Scotia. Those are the keywords that a person would enter on YouTube to read it or view it. And you can see the sun. And then at the 3 o'clock position, you have Planet X. To the right of Planet X, you have a separate lens flare. Now, that doesn't reflect the lens flare, of course, in the water below. But Planet X is generating its own light, and you can see its reflection, therefore, in the water below. Next, I think a fog bank moves in, and it obscures the sun, but Planet X is still visible. A lens flare cannot do this. Now, that's one good example of something they could simply look up themselves on YouTube. There's also some good Davis Station South Pole videos out there. And there's, in my book, which is Planet X, The Arrival in 2017 by David Mead on Amazon, I've done a video. It's on page 15 or 16 or so of the book. And I have a section called Photographic Analysis of Planet X. And I study one video which another analyst did an extensive study on. And let me just sort of explain what happened. A fellow named Glenn Vaughn on April 11th, 2015, was flying down the Pacific side of Central America. He's a professor, an ex-professor at California University. He took a 20-megapixel raw file with a Sony digital camera, and he confirmed the report by sending it in to a particular analyst for review. He took it through an aircraft window. Now, an analysis of the metadata indicated it was taken at 240 dpi, very high resolution, and the metadata further showed the date, the time, the GPS coordinates. I think it was a Sony DSC HX50V camera. In any case, using Starry Night Professional version, the video, which is referenced in my book and which is on YouTube, did a field of view analysis, and he determined Mercury is above, in other words, superior conjunction with the sun, and the object in the field of view, therefore, is not Mercury. Mercury does not have wings, as does this object, and Mercury does not have the brightness or contrast of the unknown object. Now, the analyst also performed a gamma test on a paint program. Gamma testing shows if an object is hot or cold. Hot objects generate, of course, their own light like our sun. A lens flare would be a cold object. They read direct light, they don't generate it. So he started with a gamma of 1, reducing it by steps. At point 10, the gamma illustrates stark differences. At point 01, he shows the hottest, brightest objects on the video. He then reduced brightness to a value, I think, of -3 in contrast to +2. The hot objects fade in together, proving they're genuine. Then he ran a luminance test to determine the intensity of the object, and he determined it was behind the sun, not a reflection. There are actually wings on the object, which is clearly behind the sun. Now, he stated this is deeply disturbing. The reason is that gas tails of comets follow solar winds, and they're not visible until the comet's orbit is inside of Jupiter, at which point, normally the luminosity at that point of the sun makes the tails of the comet or the planet visible. Of course, Planet X, we all call it Planet X or NIBIRU, but it is a dwarf star. It's either a red dwarf or a brown dwarf star. Now, the object, which is clearly Planet X by deductive logic process elimination, is therefore now between Mars and Jupiter. It's not in the outer reaches of the solar system. It can clearly be seen, especially from the southern hemisphere. Now, as of April 2015, therefore, the date of that video and the analysis, NIBIRU is close enough to the sun so that the sun's light is reflected to the tail, making it appearing like wings. And there's one other quick comment I'd make, because actually that video had 2 parts. The second part was a lady who lives near where I do, Sanibel Island, Florida, Melissa Huffman. Now, you can look at this video itself on YouTube. I think it has more or less gone viral, and nearly 1 million people have looked at it. And this is a 2015 video. The object is very interesting. She pans the sky and shows the object and then the moon. Now, it's clearly a planet visible just north of the sun. Using stellarium, and knowing the moon phases, comparing it to her video on the moon, you can go to the derived date, take away the atmosphere and the ocean, and you can determine the relationship of the stars to the horizon. So to determine the date, you basically just use moon charts, and the moon is well below the horizon in all dates after September 26, 2015. Therefore, the video was taken earlier. Now, September 2015 moon phases give us a comparable to the moon in the video. And if you look at the moon phases diagram to the actual picture of the moon, it has to have been photographed on September 23, 2015, based on moon phasing. Now, on that date, Mercury in stellarium is very dim, somewhat above the horizon. Also, I believe it's in a different location than the unknown object. All other planets are below the horizon. The video, therefore, conclusively and plainly shows an unidentified planet, or dwarf star, Planet X, of some significant magnitude quite clearly. So I can reach no other conclusion, and the analyst did himself, than this is a rare photo from this hemisphere of Planet X approaching us.
Wow. You know, and there's also speculation now, and I hadn't heard this until about a year ago, that not only is Planet X going to come our way, this dwarf star, but also a bunch of planets with it, like it's bringing in its own solar system. Is there evidence or truth to that?
Right. There's a number of videos there. I've seen some real good ones from the South Pole Telescope, and they indicate that there are a variety of moons around this. It's basically, as you say, it's its own solar system. A lot of people don't realize this, but binary, what we've got in our solar system here is obviously a binary twin. 76%, this is a fact, of all stars are binary twins. In fact, 16% are trinary twins. There are three suns, but ours has a binary companion, and it comes under the name of Planet X, Nibiru, and so forth, Nemesis. There are various names to it. But ours has a binary twin, and it's very common. It's extremely common, and it's basically what is approaching us. And apparently, from all descriptions, indications, reports, insider reports, photographs, and other sources of human and signal intelligence, it contains 5 to 7 moons around it. So it's a solar system approaching our solar system, which makes it extremely dangerous. The red dragon of Revelation 12 may well be, and I believe rather obviously is, Planet X, as is referred to in an earlier chapter of Revelation, I think Revelation chapter 8, in a similar manner. A colleague of mine at the university, one university in the western U.S., brought up a very interesting point, perhaps a cover-up to my attention. Here it is. Basically, he said, the areas of the dragon anomaly have been covered or patched up by Google Sky in the past. But one of the ways to actually see what is behind this patched out area is to use a program called Skyview by NASA. Skyview, what that is, it's a virtual observatory on the net. It generates images of any part of the sky from wavelengths of all regimes, radio to gamma. You just filter it. Now, when you view these images in various filters, you can see the actual color of this anomaly in Virgo is red, and it does look very menacing, as it appears to have a face like a dragon with 2 profound eyes. It's very intriguing and quite strange. Now, just for your listeners, I'll provide very briefly the right ascension and declination if they want to go to Skyview. And here it is. Just cut and paste this coordinate. Here's the right ascension, 13 hours, 50 minutes, 44 seconds. Here's the declination, and that would be minus 8 hours, 13 minutes and 59.7 seconds. So right ascension is the celestial equivalent of longitude, and in the sky latitude is called declination. So you just enter those coordinates, and then on Skyview you just choose the Iris 100 micron telescope setting, and there you are. You've never seen an object quite like this one. Now, the sign itself might be a sweeping parenthetic of that entire biblical 70th week of Daniel, which is a key to solving the most complex cryptogram in existence, the Book of the Apocalypse. As to what it is, the astronomical scientific community, I think, is keeping a very low profile. And the question is, why did they ever cover it up to begin with?
Well, and not only that, if we could get into some of the more scientific stuff as well.
Because it's so close now, it's different. When it was first observed, probably the first time it was actually observed, it was observed in the infrared spectrum in 1983 by a orbiting Earth satellite telescope called the Infrared Astronomical Satellite. And this is when all those articles appeared in the Washington Post and the New York Times and so forth. And that's when right before blackout occurred. There were some articles over a 6 to 12 month period of time when it was pretty much spoken freely of, and then all of a sudden, I think they realized the seriousness of the matter, and they went ahead and produced a blackout. Now, remember this, the blue daytime sky is going to hide Planet X until it eclipses the sun. But there is going to be a full disk solar eclipse right after September 23rd, 2017. This occurs, if you look at moon charts, on October 5th, 2017. And what happens, of course, during a full disk solar eclipse is the sky turns black, and that will reveal at that point, that week, in my opinion, the week of October 5th to 12th, if the book of Revelation is true, because this ties in perfectly with it, that could well be the exact month that we can first see it with the naked eye. So, in my opinion, combined with a predictive computer-generated astronomical model, the Bible, the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse, tells us that the red dragon, or Planet X, or NIBIRU, appears after September 23rd, 17, but it has to appear before October 11th, 2017. At that date, October 11th, 2017, the sign in Virgo, the woman Virgo, will no longer be, quote, pregnant. Then the red dragon, or Planet X, therefore must make it an appearance before October 11th. So that seems to be a cutoff date. Jupiter, which is known as the planet or the star of the Messiah, exits Virgo, the Virgin, on October 11th, after having spent, I believe, 301 days or about 42 weeks in the, quote, womb region of that constellation. And again, after that point, the woman will no longer be pregnant. So that gives us a very narrow window, just to use Book of Revelation or the Apocalypse as sort of an intel briefing. And the great sign of the woman, is described in Revelation 12, 1-2, forms and lasts for a few hours. And according, again, to astronomical models, this sign has never before occurred in human history. It will occur once on September 23rd, 27. It will never occur again. And I believe it places us right at the time frame from that analysis of the Planet X approach to the Earth. I would prepare on or before the fall of 2017. I would conduct emergency preparedness. Of course, you want to be spiritually ready. You want to have a clear conscience and all that, but you need to do physical preparations as well. I think survival gear, emergency food, that sort of thing. And the reason is that, again, all this while you're going to get increasing levels of disinformation from the mass media until it's actually there. And then they're going to say, whoops, we didn't have any notice, we don't know what happened, and so forth. And they're going to run and hide in what they've already established. But, you know, the public is there, and the public has to fend for itself. This global warming, as you've heard, I'm sure, is a cover story. The Earth is heating up from the core outward because of the approach of Planet X. During the 20th century, I think there were 35 volcanic eruptions in a typical year. Now there are more than 35 of these every single day. So basically, when X approaches, that week you see it in the sky, let's say it's October of 2017, you know, for purposes of discussion, at that point, it's not going to actually collide, I don't believe, with the Earth. The Earth is only 8,000 miles in diameter. It may pass 5, 10, 15 million miles away, but it has a very high magnetic attraction. It's going to have a gravitronic effect. It's going to cause the shifting of the Earth's crust. It's going to cause major volcanic activity. It's going to cause tidal waves. And when a pole shift happens, the ocean literally comes up out of its basin. So you're going to have major weather changes, seismic activity, and volcanic eruptions. Probably at that point, Yellowstone, the Yellowstone super caldera, will likely erupt. That could affect up to a third of the United States, cover it with ash.
Well, let me jump in here for a second. I'm glad you brought that up, because you can clearly tell a difference now with how hot the sun is. I mean, even if you look at the same temperature, you know, 75 degrees now versus 75 degrees 10 years ago, although it's the same temperature, the sun on your skin even, there's just more heat there.
If you go to the book of Revelation, the Revelation indicates that the sun is going to be hotter at that time frame. Now, the EMP effect, Planet X has a massive tail. It's fantastically charged. It's magnetic. The tail has moons and rocks in it. Now, this can down aircraft and satellite when it passes. It can affect the electrical grid. Now, of course, NASA, JPL, and the other disinformation sources ignore this data. But here are the facts. The Earth has a nickel and iron core. Now, this generates its magnetic field. However, the magnetosphere has large holes in it. The magnetosphere is a static shield. Now, under routine solar conditions, it protects the Earth from coronal mass ejections. But when Planet X arrives, we're no longer under routine solar conditions. Now, you know that the magnetic poles have been shifting towards Russia at maybe 40 miles an hour a year. But when Planet X arrives, the physical poles will shift. Now, this will create some hyper-earthquakes, tsunamis, and the shifting of land masses. So if you want to look at a few different states, one thing people can do to protect themselves is simply be in the right location when it happens. Now, there's a few states to avoid. And California is highly dangerous. It's composed of rock plates. Now, when rock is compressed, it breaks. And you'll see the crumbling of rock, of course, as its mass goes upwards. Now, the West Coast will have major catastrophic changes, synergistic proportions, tidal waves, high hurricane-force winds, earthquakes on the fault lines, volcanic activity over the magma. So it's highly dangerous. And I think the long-term danger is in riding out the shifts for those who are living near the boundaries of plates. Now, cities without mountains as a backdrop can just be washed out to sea. You'll have broken gas and water lines. San Francisco, it's on the San Andreas and other fault lines. A lot of the population will be trapped. Water will overflow the city. Survival will be minimal. California is not a good bet. Now, the area around Arizona, on the other hand, the Hoover Dam probably won't survive because of earthquake activity. And you'll have rivers flooding, and areas within rivers should probably be avoided. But you look at Phoenix and some of these main cities. Arizona has withstood many a pole shift. The area around Tucson is safe. Florida is another very dangerous state. Its highest elevation is 105 meters in the Panhandle. And but as for Central and South Florida and the Keys, these parts can be devastated by a tide of water. Colorado, for example, is a safe area. The domestic division of the CIA is relocating to Colorado. That should give viewers many clues right there. And, of course, one of the safest parts of the country is the Ozarks, northern Arkansas, southern Missouri, average elevation close to 1,000 feet, self-sufficient water supply, agricultural land. They'll do well. They're also isolated from large metropolitan areas, and they're well enough inland to avoid flooding through, tidal waves. So it's part of the preparation is probably geographic. But I would expect when it hits, when you see this object in the sky, you'll have 1 to 2 days to accumulate all of the emergency food and water you can. I would accumulate at least a 3-month supply. I would highly recommend people educate themselves, understand the whole picture, and probably take action at that point.
Wise men said, just walk this way to the dawn of the light. The wind will blow into your face as the years pass you by.
We're at Terror Alert Orange, which means something might go down somewhere in some way at some point in time. So look sharp!
So while we all went about our lives yesterday, we came very close to a catastrophic event here on planet Earth, and we didn't know about it. It turns out we just missed getting hit by an asteroid, a piece of solid rock, roughly the size of a 10-story building. Now, I say just missed because it came within 45,000 miles of us. That's a lot closer than the moon is, and scientists say way too close for something that big. Had it struck, again, the people who tell us about these things, say the impact could have had the force of 1,000 Hiroshima-strength atomic bombs over a huge area of the Earth.
There are quite a few theories about how the world might end. For example, it's been suggested that there could be a big solar storm which would take the world out. Well, we get solar storms from time to time, and they're a bit troublesome if you're an astronaut. Indeed, not good news if you're an astronaut. But down here on Earth, we're protected by the Earth's magnetosphere, the effects of the magnetic field. And okay, solar storms can disturb that. They can produce currents in power lines that sometimes cause trouble. They can take out satellites, stop satellites working. So they could affect our GPS and any telephone calls that go by satellite, for example. But they're not going to end the world. Every so often asteroids do hit the Earth. We know, we can see some of the craters. There's Meteor Crater, or Barringer Crater as it's properly called, in Arizona. And there's traces of a very big crater, partly on the Mexican Yucatan Peninsula and partly under the sea. That big crater was the result of an impact about 65 million years ago, and it's thought that's what caused the extinction of the dinosaurs and many other things. So a big thing like that could cause us some problems. Broadly speaking, what happens is when something big like that impacts, it not only makes a crater, it kicks up a whole lot of dust into the atmosphere. And the atmosphere cuts out the sunlight, and that stops crops growing and foods fail and there's starvation and so on. So that is something we need to look out for, and we are looking out for. There's an array of telescopes all around the world monitoring the sky night after night, actually monitoring about 1,000 potentially hazardous objects, things that might come and hit the Earth one day. As they monitor them, they discover that the vast majority of them won't, that as they get the orbit more accurately, they see it'll miss the Earth. But if there was something coming to hit the Earth, we'd get 2 or 3 years' notice. And even with today's technology, we could divert it so that it didn't impact the Earth. And there's research going on all the time which will improve that technology so that it gets easier to divert an incoming asteroid. We've got no knowledge of any big asteroid coming to hit us. Some of the techniques they use to deflect an asteroid, one of them is to paint it white all over, which means it reflects sunlight very well. And the sunlight bouncing off the asteroid will push it sideways so that it'll move away and not hit the Earth. That's one of the neatest solutions. But they're also developing what they call gravity tractors, satellites that are pretty heavy and through their own gravity can attract the asteroid and make it change course. And there's also some that will actually physically hook onto the asteroid and tug it aside. So there's lots of ways of doing this. The magnetic field of the Earth, the thing that makes your compass point due north, that flips over every so often. And I'm using flip as a geologist would use flip. The flip actually takes 5,000 years.
Rice planting on a test basis has begun in a village near the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. This comes after the central government lifted its ban on entering Kawauchi village in April. Rice planting in the area had been banned at all paddies following the nuclear accident last March. The purpose of this year's harvest is to verify the product's safety. On Sunday, about 40 farmers and volunteers began planting rice at 30 rice paddies. Fabric that absorbs radioactivity was laid near entrances of irrigation channels. Villagers have also sowed into the soil substances that absorb radioactivity. Once the safety of this year's harvest is confirmed, rice production will be fully resumed for the next season.
I'm very happy to be planting rice along with so many others. I hope the safety of the rice will be confirmed so that the village can fully begin producing rice next year.
From Plato's Republic was the idea that population should be controlled and unwanted life should be disposed of like trash. In other words, that some were worthy of life and others weren't. This is a concept that comes through in Darwin's ideas about survival of the fittest. If we are evolving towards individual perfection by natural means, that would mean that collectively we are in fact evolving towards a utopian society of perfect men and women. However, in that case, those with perceived poor genetic material would be slowing that collective evolution, and so the whole process could be accelerated by getting rid of those who are not made of the right stuff. The end goal of a utopian society of purebred humans would justify the means of getting rid of the lesser ones. Remember that the full title of Origin of Species was On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. One of the major influences on Darwin was a man called Thomas Malthus, who received the blessings of French deist Jean-Jacques Rousseau and famous Scottish philosopher David Hume. Incidentally, David Hume has a prominent statue on Edinburgh's Royal Mile, and if you look at the back of it, you will see this sun god symbol. Now, Thomas Malthus authored a document called The Essay on the Principle of Population, where he concluded that, amongst other things, society should adopt policies that prevent the human population from growing disproportionately larger than the food supply. Malthus, again finding a root in Plato's Republic, proposed genocide to make sure this didn't happen. Specifically, he thought to target the poor. He says, "Instead of recommending cleanliness to the poor, we should encourage contrary habits. In our towns we should make the streets narrower, crowd more people into the houses, and court the return of the plague. In the country we should build our villages near stagnant pools, and particularly encourage settlement in all marshy and unwholesome situations. But above all, we should reprobate specific remedies for ravaging diseases, and those benevolent but much mistaken men who have thought they were doing a service to mankind by projecting schemes for the total extirpation of particular disorders." Malthus believed that by such methods the undesirables in society could be effectively culled. He said regarding children, "We are bound in justice and honour formally to disclaim the right of the poor to support. To this end, I should propose a regulation be made declaring that no child born should ever be entitled to parish assistance. The illegitimate infant is comparatively speaking of little value to society, as others will immediately supply its place. All children beyond what would be required to keep up the population to this desired level must necessarily perish, unless room be made for them by the deaths of grown persons." The logic behind the idea that those who serve society least should be destroyed was echoed under Darwinism in the survival of the fittest. The individual is lost in the collective. Again, the end of a utopian society justifies the means of killing the poor and the weak. This naturally leads to another idea put forward by Plato, that people who are perceived to have pure genetic materials should be encouraged to breed amongst themselves to produce a race of supermen fit for ruling over the masses. This selective breeding is called eugenics. Eugenics actually found its Enlightenment-era origin in Charles Darwin's cousin, Sir Francis Galton. Galton regurgitated the thoughts of Plato in his work, Hereditary Genius, which was basically a racist tirade advocating a system of selective breeding for purposes of providing more suitable races or strains of blood a better chance of prevailing over the less suitable. In other words, trying to artificially speed the upward course that evolutionists thought we were naturally already on. In truth, selective breeding had been practiced for some time amongst the elite. Inbreeding was commonplace amongst the ruling class to protect the genetic purity of their future stock. Galton merely took this idea and popularized it as a legitimate science. This very same tradition was in fact practiced by Charles Darwin himself in the hopes of maintaining a genetic superiority in his own bloodline. Darwin married the youngest granddaughter of his maternal father. Researcher Ian Taylor reveals the outcome of this project. Darwin's idea of inbreeding to produce superior stock can be seen to be a complete disaster in the case of his own 10 children. Of the 10, one girl, Mary, died shortly after birth. Another girl, Anne, died at the age of 10 years. His eldest daughter, Henrietta, had a serious and prolonged breakdown at 15 in 1859. 3 of his 6 sons suffered such frequent illness that Darwin regarded them as semi-invalids, while his last son, Charles Jr., was born mentally retarded and died in 1858, 19 months after his birth. Science has shown that inbreeding actually leads to speedier destruction of the genetic code rather than evolution because of something called biological mutations, which is why so-called purebred dogs are in fact more prone to health problems than mixes. The errors in their genetic code multiply as they are bred amongst themselves over long periods. But where true science fails, the religion of scientism continues stubbornly on. If they had followed God's wisdom in Leviticus 18, they would have heeded the warning not to commit incest, and they would have been all the better for it. In their own human wisdom, however, they persisted and reaped the consequences. The idea of eugenics continued to be promoted in the scientific community for a long time afterwards. At the turn of the 20th century, in 1901, the Statistics Department of London's University College became the headquarters for the Eugenics Education Society. Motivated by Galton's vision of a future utopia, ruled by a genetically engineered pure elite, the Eugenics Society grew into a successful political movement and would eventually inspire Hitler's Holocaust against the Jews. Population control is still a big issue for the elite today. As recently as May 24, 2009, The Times reported of a secret meeting of billionaires held in New York City, including the likes of Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey, where the #1 issue on the agenda was how to cap the global...
Look at it. This is what's washing up. And as it washes up, it's bringing all these jelly things. What is that? It's all over.
State warns on EMP. There's no help coming. Oh, this was interesting. Washington. Arizona Governor Jan Brewer has signed legislation to require the state's Department of Emergency and Military Affairs to prepare materials outlining what citizens need to know to deal with either a natural or man-made electromagnetic pulse event that could knock out the vulnerable electrical grid system over a wide geographical region. But if this isn't another red alert for you, I don't know what else to tell you. The legislation, SB 1476, was introduced by Senator David Farnsworth. It includes the type and quantity of food, water, and medical supplies that each person should stockpile in case an EMP occurs over the U.S. What? The legislation, however, doesn't require actual hardening of the grid within the state. Unreal. And, Russia sanctions, I almost read the NBA bans, Russia sanctions not tough enough yet, analysts say. Well, if they get any quote-unquote tougher, they're going to be really attacking Putin. And that's just going to make him mad. I mean, it's not doing anything. It's actually creating another financial system to fall back on when this one collapses.
So, do you believe in global warming?
Yes, I do. Global warming is a bad way to phrase it. Do I believe in climate change? Yes. Yeah, to an extent, I do.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Why do you believe global warming?
Because there's scientifically valid proof that global warming exists. Because it's getting hotter and colder. Like, I've been in Georgia my whole life, and we've never really seen snow the way we've seen it the past 2 years. Yeah, so.
Because I think that humans have an effect on the planet that has been observed through scientific reasoning.
I mean, because it's been proven. Like, scientific evidence shows that global warming is real. So, plenty of studies that indicate over the last 30 years what shit's going on if we're not too careful. Like, so we're going to ruin our Earth. Yeah.
It's self-evident. The ice is melting. We're all doomed. We're all going to die.
I really don't know what's going on with the government. I know there are tons of weather machines. I know all the weather isn't real weather, so it's kind of like, who knows, you know? Right. 1 minute it's snowing, 1 minute it's raining, then it's hot and it's cold, so you just
roll with it.
Yeah, climate change or global warming, yeah, I'm fairly certain that it's, created by the activities of humans.
Do you have any ideas of how we can maybe fix it?
Eat the rich.
That's all. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Here's why some believe a pole shift, a serious one, a complete one, may be on the near horizon. On December 29, 2003, NASA released this article about our migrating pole. The bottom location, 1831, in approximately 70 years it moved up one notch to 1904. Approximately 70 years later, up in 1972, it moved considerably more. And it moved about that same distance in 29 years, well less than half the time. Now, the magnetic north was measured in 2005 at 82.7 degrees north, 114.4 degrees west. Now, each block here is 5 by 5 degrees, so it would be about here where the cursor is. A later study revealed that the pole is trekking towards Russia at about 40 miles per year, but not there yet. And that's all we know. Russia and Europe got tossed this winter. The USA had a light go of it. But the North Pole has not been measured in Russia, and if you happen to know otherwise for a fact, please send a link. Let's be clear, the increasingly fleet-footed North Pole may change direction, stop entirely, speed up, or something else. This may never be anything to worry about. And then again, a complete magnetic reversal could happen this century. Or this year. If you read these articles, you will see that the pole is not going at a constant speed. Take that into your considerations. Be safe, everyone.
In 812, when the fourth angel blew his trumpet, 1/3 of the sun, 1/3 of the moon, and 1/3 of the stars was struck, so that 1/3 of them turned dark. 1/3 of the day was kept from shining, and also the night. I believe this judgment may be declaring a shift in the axis of the earth. This would cause 1/3 of the day to be lost, as the earth starts to revolve around a new axis, which would alter the orbit of the sun, moon, stars and planets. And the sun would rise and set in a different place. And the moon would also appear to have altered its orbit. A shift in the axis of the earth could indeed cause 1/3 of the day and night to be lost. And instead of a 24-hour day, we would experience a 16-hour day. If the earth loses 8 hours, then sunset would occur at about 10 o'clock in the morning. Which means, all the clocks in the world would have to be reset. God has done things like this before. In 2 Kings 20 verse 8, God made the sun go backwards, and then forward again. Which would mean that the earth's rotation would have rolled back, and then forward again. And during the days of Joshua in Joshua 10 verse 12, God made the sun and moon stand still for a while. Which means that both the earth and the moon's revolution stopped altogether.
Technology does exist. It is real as you or me, and it's a whole lot more out there than even the most diehard believers could possibly fathom. The truth is that we, and by we I mean this planet and the people of this planet, are in essence blind to what is really going on in the cosmos and interstellar space. What people call aliens, we call IBs, or in layman's terms, interdimensional beings. And what we found out and have known about since the early 70s is that, in simplest terms, other dimensions or planes, as we call them, exist and lay on top of each other, almost stacked, as if you had a blanket with another blanket stacked on top of it and another blanket stacked on top of it. To explain it so you can understand, you can imagine the Earth and our reality as a thin blanket, and all of these other higher dimensions are the blankets laying directly on top of ours. However, we can only see our own blanket. Now, the alien beings, or the ships that we have seen in videos, and that many people have captured over the years, are in fact what we call jumpers, in that they exist in their relative dimensions, but have in fact jumped into ours. we have discovered that most of the time we are unable to see them, as they are at a wavelength indifferent to our own, and our senses, eyes and ears, cannot detect. From the information that I have gathered and been briefed on, every planet, star, and galaxy within our own plane and universe, as we see it, exists also in these other dimensions. We've detected that we know of and that I've been briefed on at least 4 other dimensions that do exist. Now, as I said, every planet we know of, every galaxy does exist in these other dimensions. However, with each new dimension, each planet, galaxy, star takes on a different form. To explain it in the most simplest terms, you can look at our own planet, Jupiter, which is in the outer reaches of our solar system. Now, to us, it's a deadly gaseous planet, completely uninhabitable. However, when you look at Jupiter in an elevated dimension, you will see that it has completely changed in all forms. You will see that it's no longer a deadly ball of gas, but is now solid, has a different color, and is now inhabited. We know for a fact this is true due to the fact that the government has the technology to detect these higher dimensions and actually get a small view of what the solar system looks like on the other side, as we call it, in these other dimensions. There is much we do not know about the universe and how it works. However, here are the facts that I can confirm as truth and were made known to me, and that I and the other people that I worked with have been briefed on. Now, we are not alone in the universe. There are alien beings within our own dimension of space, as well as other dimensions. The planet Earth is an early stage, I guess you could say, training ground, if you will, whereby which we as beings will live until we advance to the higher dimensions. Now, we are not the bottom of the food chain, and we have discovered that there are at least 2 dimensions below our own plane. But that is as far as I will go regarding that. Now, I'm getting a little bit low on time, so I will leave you with a few other important things that people will no doubt want to know about later in time once this video is made public. Now, these are things that I have been briefed on by my superiors and that are common knowledge in the Black Ops community. Now, the planet that we know of as Mars was at one time inhabited, but again, at one time was wiped out by the people who inhabited the planet, which were much more technologically advanced than we are, which we discovered by testing and analyzing the chemical residue found from the blasts around the planet, as well as artifacts that we've also discovered on the planet, including the infamous glass tubes seen in the few of the publicly made photographs from NASA. Now, these are not glass structures, but a glass-like material that is about 1,000 times stronger than any material or steel that we have on our own planet. These tubes were used as a means of travel underground and above ground by the people who inhabited this planet. It is thought from our research that there are still an ET presence inhabiting Mars, but again, this is as far as I will go, and that I was briefed on regarding that matter. Now, I'm not trying to be completely vague, but I am trying to give you a picture of what is going on out there that doesn't completely put me in more danger than I am already in just by revealing the few things that I have. One of the last things that I will reveal, and that is definitely a fact, and that I have been briefed on, and that many other people involved with the Black Ops community have been briefed on, and that is our own moon. which does in fact have alien bases on it, and also has bases from our own government. Now, there is an ET presence, which is primarily located on the dark side of the moon. The Apollo program was in all actuality a reconnaissance mission, so that we could research what was exactly there and who. You will notice that many of the photos from the Apollo missions have airbrushed out buildings and bases, and this is the truth of the matter. About half of the video that you will see that is documented from the Apollo missions was in fact shot here on Earth at Area 51. In fact, if you look at satellite imagery, you can actually see what's left of a crater field created at Area 51 that was used in the filming. Now, the truth is that most of the footage from the moon was simply cluttered with bases, with alien buildings, and from what one astronaut said, and I'm quoting, what were a constant presence of alien vehicles flying over the surface, cluttering up the footage. So again, they showed the American people what they could and recreated the rest here on Earth that they couldn't show. From what we know, the dark side of the moon is where most of the alien presence is located. It's a more primitive alien race from what we can see, and our research tells us. It's more primitive than the alien beings you would see on higher dimensions, but still thousands, if not millions of years ahead of us. Now, we have our own bases, which are primarily located in or near the Sea of Tranquility, which is the site of Apollo 11, and also one base that I know of located near the crater Sabine D. To this day, we're still sending secret missions to and from the moon. However, I do not know the complete details of what we are doing.
A war is being waged that you may know nothing about, the war against the homeless. On April 18th, the ACLU sent a letter to both the Department of Justice and the Detroit Police Department urging that the practice of dumping the homeless be stopped. A year-long ACLU investigation claims the following. Detroit police officers stopped people perceived to be homeless in the tourist area of Greektown in Detroit. They forced them into vans, took them for a ride, and deserted them miles away. The sad truth, Detroit isn't the only city that treats the homeless this way. Joining me now from Detroit is Michael Steinberg, legal director of the ACLU of Michigan. Nice to have you, Michael.
Thank you, Melissa.
So tell me, what did your investigation show that the police were doing to folks who are experiencing homelessness in Detroit?
Essentially, what the police were doing were kidnapping individuals off the streets of tourist-friendly areas of Detroit, putting them in handcuffs, throwing them in the back of a wagon or a police car, and transporting them either outside the city or to deserted parts of the city and abandoning them. They then tell the individuals that they weren't welcome back into Greektown or other tourist-friendly areas. Sometimes they'd make it difficult for them to return by making them throw their money down a storm drain. And the problem, of course, is that the lifeline for many of these individuals is in Greektown. There are warming centers, there's food and churches and other services. So they'd have to walk sometimes through the middle of Michigan winter. One person had a blood clot in his leg, and it took him over 3 hours to get back.
Michael, I want to take a moment and listen to some of the men talking about their own experiences, and then I'll have you respond to something.
Okay.
Didn't ask who we were. You know, get in the van.
I asked him if I was free to go. He told me no.
You took like maybe a 15-minute ride.
You don't know where you're going. You don't know where you're ending up. Maybe when you get there, you're abused in some way. What would that feel like?
And we're walking back. It took us almost 5 hours to get back. Walking, it was cold.
So, Michael, have the Detroit Police Department or the Department of Justice addressed these concerns?
Well, we had the quickest response time in Detroit by the police in history, I think. As soon as we sent our letter, they sent over 2 members of Internal Affairs saying they wanted to investigate it. They've met with some of the individuals that we've spoken to, and we hope it will put an end to it. We've also reported it to the Department of Justice because we believe that the practice violates the consent judgment that was entered into between the DOJ and the Detroit Police Department.
So, Michael, part of what we've been talking about this morning is criminalizing drugs, but there's also this kind of impact of criminalizing homelessness. And we were looking at not only in Detroit, but sort of all over the country, municipalities doing things like making it illegal to sleep or sit in a store or in personal buildings, laws punishing people for begging or panhandling, enforcement of these so-called quality of life ordinances. Tell me, is there a war on the homeless?
You can definitely appropriately characterize it as a war on the homeless. We are challenging a state law in Michigan that makes it a crime to beg in public. We have represented individuals who have been charged with trespass for sleeping on public land. They're essentially criminalizing the status of being homeless. Society, if we want to stop seeing homeless people on the streets, we as a society have to treat the problem as a social problem, not a criminal justice problem. We have to provide mental health services to those who need it. We have to provide drug treatment programs for those who need it in public housing. We can't make it a crime to be homeless. Homelessness is not going to go away by making it illegal.
Michael Steinberg in Detroit, I so appreciate that point, and it dovetails so nicely with what we're talking about in terms of drugs. We have a set of social responsibilities, epidemiological problems here. It is not solved through criminalizing. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.